You're so stupid. Oh, this is great. Okay.
I was like, we're gonna figure this one out real quick.
I was waiting on Facebook. I'm like, nothing? Nothing? All
I was going
right. I
through
thought
until
it
you
was going to
said
be
it.
the other one, though.
Which one? Your gangster one? And your oversized tee?
From, yeah.
It didn't come through very clear.
Mm, good.
Might be able to change it. Let me go play.
No, this one's fine.
It'll.
I think we're the only ones on here.
That's the way it always is.
I was wondering why you were on this so early. You couldn't wait.
I was like, if I just don't do it, I'll forget and I get sidetracked. All right, let's see. Might have a good location for. Do you know MJ in the office?
No.
Yeah, if you look her up, you'd think you'd recognize her. MJ Westbrooks, if you look it up, you'll see her.
I don't know who that is.
Her boyfriend needed enough space for his electronics business, and I think I found two really good locations. Hope we can get those lined up.
I need to try to find the tattoo place somewhere else. And there was that one in Buckhead. I'm gonna try to call them again, but it's by that same group and that same agent that had the two listed in Chambly that he said no to. So I don't know how that's gonna work out.
Well, this is great. I could have just called you.
Well, they let us in.
Yeah.
Okay. You ever been to Elberton, Georgia?
Yes, I have actually sold a house there.
Really?
It's near the lake.
What can you tell me about like the downtown area and stuff?
It is a
And like,
small town, like one stoplight kind of town.
yeah, that's what I thought by looking at it. And one of these houses they picked is there.
That's a hell of a drive, but yeah,
Yeah. There's a really nice one in Kingston.
yeah,
The brand new construction that someone just bought land and put a house on.
yeah. Overton's a cool little town.
I don't know if
But
it's their vibe though, if it's that small.
hey, there's someone else coming on. Nope,
Sure.
they left.
They were like, what is this?
Like, what the hell? Too many Rachels. Delete, delete.
Oh my God. You're a fool.
There she is. Carrie with a K.
Hey, Carrie.
Hi, sorry, I'm like doing two things at once. Hi, how are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm good.
It's,
How was the weekend?
it's okay. Yeah, we did some open houses.
Yeah, that's great. Was it busy?
The one on Saturday only had like three groups through, kind of slow, but the one
Okay.
on yesterday on Sunday was pretty steady, like one after the other. Maybe
Okay, well,
like,
that's good.
yeah.
They were trying to separate, but they never finalize the divorce, right? So on paper, I guess, still community
Did
property.
they file divorce paperwork with the court? Did they start
They
the
did.
process? No, they just like moved out and,
Right.
okay, so technically it's still.
Right, so say that the daughter, will, after he passed, she gets a succession. And so now she take over, I guess, the property tax, things like that. But you have the child, the son of the mother, he stays there. Yeah. She's trying to now take over that property, make it hers altogether. Does he have rights because his mother was a part of that community property? And now I'm talking about just for Georgia.
Right.
Or does, because she did a succession, that now she's just primary owner over it now, and she pays the taxes.
So there's a lot to unpack in that. So my first question is, who was on the deed? Just the dad?
No, and I have the deed,
So
Oh.
both of them?
yeah, even if it's part, yes.
Okay, so that means both of them are owners. Do you know if they held title as joint tenants with right of survivorship? Do you have a copy of the deed?
Yeah, actually.
Okay. And what would you be talking with
My
them?
name's Amar, I go by Mark
Mark, what's your last name?
Harrison.
Harrison, nice to meet you. I'm Ashley Connor.
Ask me to comment. You detected me too.
Maybe
But I
that's
just came back from out of town, and so, yes, right. So this is a real going on
Yeah,
issue for me.
yeah.
Yeah, sure. Is she able, because she did the succession,
Huh? The love word? Yeah, I know, I'm trying to pick.
does she have more advice than he does? And she can kick him out possibly? Or because that's a child of the mother that's on the deed?
So we don't really have secession like you're talking about in Georgia, so that's kind of a Louisiana concept that I'm not quite as familiar with. I think it's probably part of the probate process in general would be my guess. In Georgia, we would probate the will and then whatever the will says would kind of structure that. So the executor of the estate, some states call it personal representative of the estate, would just ensure that whatever the will said was taken care of. I didn't see the joint tenancy language on there, but I don't know if that's different in Louisiana. But if we're pretending that it's a Georgia property, either there's the joint tenancy language, which means if two people own property and one dies, the other owns it outright. If that language is not there, which I didn't see, but again, not sure on Louisiana, but from a Georgia perspective, since that language is not there, when one person dies, their estate is one owner and the surviving person is the other owner.
Right.
And so if that's the case, so if the wife is, so they're both deceased.
Mhm.
So you have two owners, so two estates are the owners. So whatever her will or however her estate is probated, like if there's no will, then it'll be administrated, at least in like Georgia words. And there's an order of who gets your property when you die, if you don't have a will saying otherwise. So if she's got one child, then probably either, I'm assuming she named him in the will, or if no will.
I think he had, you know.
So if she had no will, I would think most states have pretty similar rules on who gets what. It's typically like spouse, kids, and other heirs. So, it would kind of depend on who died first as to who gets what. If she died years and years before him, it could be that Louisiana says everything went to the spouse.
Right.
And then the spouse has everything. Or it could say the spouse gets 80% and the kid gets 20%,
Right.
just whatever that law is, if there's no will. And then if there is a will, and it sounds like, I'm assuming, again, the succession is part of that probate, where she's like claiming
Yeah.
her inheritance for the gift, so he probably left it, or she No, he probably left it to her. So it really just kind of depends on who dies first and then what Louisiana does with that probate and,
Probate.
yeah,
Will, succession.
yeah. So I would recommend talking to probably like an estate attorney.
And I have one,
There.
I have one there, but, I mean, we spoke for 2 hours regarding some other things that I couldn't even get to this part. I'm waiting on this call on Monday, but
Gotcha.
just because I'm here. I was just-
Yeah.
Well, welcome you guys on Zoom.
Oh my gosh, Rachel, I love your background picture.
That's Cam.
That's Cam. I can't. And even though I'm not
Yes,
talking.
apparently there's 2 of me on here today.
Uh-huh.
That is such a cute picture.
One current and one past, Rachel.
That is too funny. How's everyone's weekend? Good. Probably better than mine. Uh-oh.
Oh, no, did you not have a good weekend?
You watch college football?
Oh, I forgot. Yeah, I actually
I'm a
watched
big Alabama fan. I went to Alabama.
Oh, yeah?
It was rough, which is why I'm not speaking to you. So he asked the question, I don't respond. I am ignorant.
I wasn't thinking that.
It's been 2 years. Sounds bad.
Hey,
I grew up in Alabama.
I did not grow up.
I don't know.
Once you cross the state line, you have to.
I don't
You have to shoot.
Well, let's steer this conversation away from football.
Yeah, it's serious business.
Yeah. Okay, does anyone have any particular topics or questions that we want to kick off with? So, is you like anything that happened or?
Everybody is like the
Everyone's feeling perfect. No, you have anything about, yeah.
So something that I've seen a little bit lately is people trying to get creative with the CAD, which, let's not get creative with the community association. Let's just utilize the form, and by creative, what I mean is there's a paragraph on there where you're filling in the total amount that the buyer's gonna have to pay at closing, right? For transfer, initiation, all those kind of like miscellaneous fees, right? So if the seller doesn't disclose that, they have to pay the difference that they didn't disclose. So they put 700 as 1,000, buyer pays 700, seller pays the 300 that they failed to disclose. And so what I've seen a couple times is people writing in little sentences next to that paragraph, trying to override it in the contract. Can you override that? Yeah, absolutely. You can write a special stipulation that says buyer to pay all transfer, initiation, capital contribution, et cetera, fees by the HO. I wouldn't use et cetera, I would name them all, but, you can do that, but where you can't do that is just to like type a sentence next to that paragraph. And the reason for that is the CAD later on goes to say, if you don't fill in a number, it reads 0. And the seller has to pay anything they didn't disclose. So if you just type a paragraph there, you've altered the document, you don't have anyone initial it. That sentence means nothing. It's as if it's not there at all. Or I see people write in the blank, like TBD. That doesn't help. That doesn't count. That doesn't mean when you later disclose it, that your seller's not gonna pay that difference, okay? What the CAD also says is that if you fill in something and then you later update it, because as you learn things with any disclosure, you have to continually update them so that you're disclosing the right information to the buyer. If you update what's in that blank, what we look at as far as allocating fees is what was initially disclosed. So just be careful when you're dealing with that. Don't try to get cute with the CAD and like override what it already says. Have your seller fill it out correctly, or if you really don't know and you wanna protect them, write a legitimate special stipulation. Cause then it's part of the contract, everyone signed off on it, and we know my little hierarchy, and by my little hierarchy, I mean the contract hierarchy of what trumps what in the contract. Is special stipulation are gonna override exhibits and addenda. So what the CAD says can be altered by a special stipulation, can also be altered by an amendment. So just keep that in mind when you're putting that together, because I think, you know, we've said 8 million times that HOAs are terrible. HOAs are not amazing at like updating people, and they want to hide the ball a little bit, to be totally honest with you. So what we're seeing a lot is sellers or agents will call and say, hey, my seller cannot get the HOA to answer. which I think y'all experience that as the lender as well. We can get the HOA to send us the docs that we need to like underwrite the loan, through the condo, whatever. So that is a thing that happens, and I think that's why people are trying to get cute on the CAD. But just don't do that, either have that number and make it larger than you think it needs to be, or like I said, write a special stipulation. And there's not really anything that we can do, or you as the agent can do to force the HOA to respond. They kind of have an inordinate amount of power, to be honest with you, which they completely utilize. So just know that that is gonna be a roadblock. What's my number one rule on CADs? The most important thing you need to know about a CAD.
Fill out a form when, before,
What?
to fill out the form, the CAD form before, no?
Anybody in Zoom land know my most important rule on CADs? Yes, as the agent, do not fill out the CAD. That is the quickest way to commission equity, right? Because if you put that the buyer's gonna pay $500 and it ends up being 700, that seller's gonna look to you and say, well, you filled that number out, so I think you should pay that $200 difference. And it's gonna be, and I mean, legally, you don't have to, but as far as like your business and word of mouth and all of that, you don't really have a good comeback to that. You're gonna be like, either, sorry, man, we're never gonna do business again, clearly, because I failed you, or sure, I'll pay the $200. Neither one of which is a good outcome for you. I think the easy way to tell people you're not gonna do that, because I think there are sellers who are like, you represent me, you should do everything for me. That's the thing that I totally understand y'all run into. I think your response to that is the HOA will talk to you because you are an owner there. I'm not an owner, they have no obligation to talk to me whatsoever, so I'm not able to even get that information for you. Plus, look at this paragraph, if it's not disclosed correctly, then you have to pay the overage, and I don't wanna, not be able to get the information and set you up to have to pay something at closing, so you need to call and get this information. So be careful about that, but that's one of the things that I've been seeing recently, that's kind of problematic.
So the buyer's agent sends the offer, it's got the existing CAD, something changes, so your counter would include
The buyer's agent wouldn't do the CAD, or wouldn't do the CAD.
I mean, but
But
they
they have part of the listing, the buyer's agent puts the offer together and incorporates the CAD.
Right,
And then something later changes,
Right.
your seller just updates the CAD and says, hey, they came out with a new special assessment, I've updated the CAD, here you go. Or, hey, I just learned that they're changing the yearly dues, I've updated the CAD, here you go. I got a violation on my property, updated the CAD, here you go. You don't have to counter with it, 'cause
Okay.
at that point, you probably already have a signed contract. It's just a disclosure.
okay,
Now, could you amend the contract to replace it? Sure, but the point is you just have to update it. So if the buyer refuses to acknowledge it, fine, you still have to have sent it. Because what,
but the contract, but the numbers in the case will be approved.
correct, for that transfer initiation
Right.
period.
Okay, so that's good. So they can update things like the dues have changed or whatever, but they can't come back 2 weeks later and be like, oh, transfer fee is actually this.
Well, they can, but it's not gonna help them at closing.
Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
The buyer doesn't have it.
Correct. Yeah, but there's a lot of information on like that, because kind of big picture wise, what Georgia law says about disclosure is that sellers are only legally obligated to disclose hidden defects. However, if they make other disclosures, they have to do so honestly. So the issue for the seller, if they don't update the CAD, like maybe there's litigation against the HOA, and maybe your lot is not involved at all, but maybe it involves the clubhouse. Like there was the neighborhood, like Chattahoochee Run or something where they had like a horse farm, but someone was suing the HOA because they wanted to turn it into like a spa or something. So that was an issue, I forget, or like a hair salon, I don't know what they wanted, but that is relevant because maybe you bought in there because you liked that there was stables there for your horse, right? So that kind of thing you want to disclose, and what could happen is since you've made the disclosure saying there is no litigation, then there's litigation, then the buyer buys it. They find out later on that you knew about the litigation and didn't disclose it, they can sue you. because you made a dishonest disclosure, because you had the obligation to update the disclosure and you failed to do that. Same thing like when you get an inspection, you have to update your seller's property disclosure. The CAD is just another disclosure. So you are obligated to update it. It's just you can't update the transfer initiation. In large part, I think what happens is you make these disclosures, the buyer says, okay, I'm gonna have to pay $1,000 at closing to the HOA. No problem. Then you get the HOA closing letter, you learn it's $1,500. The seller can update it at that point in time. There's literally no reason to have the initial disclosure. You haven't allowed the buyer to plan. Because if it's $3,000, now maybe that extra $2,000, the buyer doesn't have that money, so you can't force them to pay it when they made the decision to sign the contract, knowing it was $1,000. It's kind of the theory behind why that piece, should you update it? Sure, but it's not gonna actually save your seller's money. If you want the buyer to pay for it, then you would just do an amendment saying, you know, buyer to pay $3,000 initiation fee at closing, period, everyone signs it, then that's gonna override the cap. You have a question, Ivan?
Yes, regarding the updated SPDs.
Mhm.
So if you're updating it, so exactly the fact, should they, you know, the owners, the sellers, should they actually update the current SPD or just file a new one? I was always hung between the two.
I think really whatever is easier, it's gonna be the way to do it. I mean, if you're just updating one piece, it might be easier to go in.
Initial and stuff
You can do that.
with dates, yeah, because things change, so that's why we're updating
Yeah.
it.
Right, so you can initial it, and I don't know what like your system looks like, so. As far as like the contract, if you get an inspection report and there's 18 things you're changing, I would not go crossing out.
Oh, yeah, it's too much.
changes. I think if you can like log into your system and just like have your seller delete one answer, fill it out and say, hey, we updated the seller's property disclosure, here you go. That's probably the better way to do it from a seller perspective, because you don't necessarily have the obligation to say, like, hey, we found termites, here they are. You've updated the disclosure and sent it over, therefore putting the onus on the buyer side to figure out what changed. If they ask, tell them, right? You're not trying to be a jerk, but if you start crossing out stuff, I think that's gonna create more questions on the buyer side, I would think. But like legally, it doesn't matter. If you wanna cross it out and initial it, you can, just make sure that you date it next to it. And I think I don't remember off the top of my head, does the buyer initial the SPD?
I think they signed it.
They sign it, they
Yeah.
sign it. So I mean, technically to have it correct, we have them initial next to it, but legally speaking, if they were to come back and say, hey, you never disclosed this. You could say, hey, I did, here's where I sent it to you, here's
Right.
where the change is, so like, I'm sorry that you refused to sign it, but I did in fact disclose it to you, because disclosures are one way, right? It's like big picture.
Right,
You know, when you make a disclosure, because you can't have a buyer say, well, I don't sign off on that defect disclosure, therefore you didn't make it. So I think your seller would be fine,
I think
but
the little details are important, because if you're changing or updating an SPD, for example, and you do it all right with your seller, and then if somebody already saw the house with the old SPD, then I just sent them to them, so that I sent a new one to them, because I didn't wanna be looking like I was trying to hide something. But then what happens, you gotta go to the house, and now change the one you have at the house,
Yeah.
you know, because usually you put one in the house as well. So there's a few steps involved that it's just, you know,
well, I think if it's at the house, if you're not under contract yet, just go to the
Oh, yeah,
house
yeah.
and switch it out.
Change it up, switch it out.
That's not a big deal, but if you're already under contract, then it's probably not at the house anymore, and if it is, there's really not a reason.
but it's okay, for a backup contract, somebody can see it again or something, so I just switched it out.
And if in DocuSign, we start modifying the document, does it wipe out the signatures?
Well, you know what I did on this one, is I did it manually,
Okay,
in their own handwriting, of course, and their own initials and signature and stuff, and dated, that way, because I know that handwritten stuff, trumps, type stuff, so I figure, hey,
okay.
Yeah.
can't go wrong that way.
Yeah, no, that's fine, especially for like a small change, but I think if it was me and I was updating a whole thing based off of an inspection report,
Oh, is
I
that,
probably would just go ahead and do a new one. And that probably prevents your seller from missing something too. again, if it's
Right.
one thing, that's, you
Sure.
know, you're not gonna miss the one thing you're fixing, but if it's like a whole report, then what you don't wanna do is say, okay, I think I got everything, and then you accidentally miss the spot where you were like disclosing the fence encroachment that you just learned about, and then they can come back and say, hey, you lied on this, and they would be right. So it probably prevents errors, but either way, it works.
Thanks.
Or actually, could I ask a question about the technology here? Because like this, I can't see. It looks like there's the whole room at the top of my screen, and then your heads are chopped off. I can't see your heads. Do you know if there's any way control? And it's going back and forth. It's about making me dizzy.
So even when we're talking, you can't see us?
I can hear you talking, but the camera is going like your head is chopped off. I only see your feet sitting in the chair. So I'm wondering if you move
you get
forward a
closer?
little bit or something, we wouldn't have so much reverberation. Maybe we're hearing it twice.
But should you guys get closer to the microphone and everything to the camera?
Closer.
See if that helps? Does that help, Ruth?
Yeah, that sounds better. Yeah,
Can you see them?
I can see them. Well, then not now
Well,
because
not now,
the
yeah,
screen is sort of moving around, but
right. That's why for Aaron to sit down.
when Aaron sits down, that'll be good. All right, I can see Aaron sitting there in the empty chair, so that's better. Yeah. I don't know why that screen has the whole room across the top, which is causing you not to be able to see the speaker.
Maybe it's just because it's kind of empty in here, maybe the sound bouncing around, who knows?
But this is better?
Yes, that's better. Thank you.
All right, so yes, not have nothing to make myself stop spitting. Like the table, I was making like,
Are you drinking this early?
no, it's never, I promise.
Sure.
So I can talk about one thing that I've experienced this last week, and just as an agent perspective, to be knowing, like, when your buyers are shopping, meaning shopping lenders, like, make sure that, you know, if you're advising them at all, because, you know, usually it's like you want them to use us or whoever your preferred lender is, or something that is us, but, and maybe they've been pre-approved with someone else, so they're like, well, I'm gonna compare and blah, blah, blah. We all know this story. But we had one that was under contract, and we sent the loan disclosures and everything, and he hadn't signed yet, and I'm calling him and I'm like, hey, you know, you got an e-sign so we can continue on, and he's like, well, I've got a couple of quotes from another lender and they were lower, and so we were kind of going back and forth, and last week there were a couple of days that were really bad for rates, so, you know, the first thing we're asking is, one, how old are your quotes, because rates have changed. And so make sure if you're having those discussions or you've got someone who's shopping that, you know, you're making sure that they're comparing on the same day, first of all, because in today's rate environment, the volatility is pretty big. So, you know, you could have one from 3 days ago and it's very different from what it would be today. So obviously if they're just getting a quote or an estimate, nothing's locked, so that's different. The other thing was, I finally asked him, I said, look, can you just send me the estimates that you have, like, because if I can get them in black and white, one, I can take them up the chain and be like, hey, we need to get closer to this or whatever.
Right.
But also, a lot of times clients don't really understand everything that goes into that rate. They may not be seeing the other fees and understanding that that's actually buying it down, and they're really just focusing in on that interest rate and stuff like that. So when I can get the estimate from them, one, I can educate them and talk them through it and say, okay, do you see this fee? Do you see this? You know, yeah, your closing costs are lower, but you see that they're estimating your property taxes at $150 a month and they really are like $375. Like, that's gonna change your cash to close when you're pre-funding an escrow account, all those kinds of things. So if they're looking at one number, they're often not seeing the details that really matter. So when he sent that to me, the first glaring difference was we had him at 15% down, which is what the financing exhibit on the contract said. This showed him putting down $100,000, which was more like 27% down. So there's a big difference on your interest rate if you're putting down 15% or over 25%. So that was really the difference maker right then. I picked up the phone and I said, Seth, I'm like, here's the difference. You know, I can get the same rate they're quoting you when I change your down payment. So what are you actually putting down? oh, we're selling our house, we're putting down the 100K. I said, okay, there you go. I can get there. So that's one of the big things, just, helping your clients understand that, one, they're a lot more involved than just the rate. So if they always want to get an estimate in writing from whoever they're getting a quote from. So don't just take an interest rate at face value. And then, we are the consultants, like we want them to work with us, obviously, but we want what's best for them too. There have been times where, especially like a builder or something like that, they'll bring an estimate, we'll say, we'll try to get as close as we can, and if we can't do it, I'll be like, hey, if they can actually lock you in at this right now, and everything works out, take it. We don't want to give it away, but we're also not gonna try to convince them to do something that's not right for them. So we truly do have their best interest at heart. Usually that is us, but once in a while. So we really will consult with them and educate them and say, hey, send me that estimate, let's look at them together. Hey, I can get to here, or whatever that is. But just make sure estimates are on the same day. The down payment, the credit score, all of those things that are being used are the same for both lenders. If they haven't done an application with someone and they're just getting a fee sheet, that means nothing. Because if they haven't plugged in all the actual, it's just them, and there unfortunately are plenty of lenders out there that will try to kind of bait and switch a little bit, show a really low rate, and then be like, oh, rates have gone up a little bit or whatever, or here's the fee for that rate, and they're not really upfront.
What was the high last week?
Huh?
What was the high last week? 7.15 again, or?
No, there were rates higher than, it depends on credit, I've got some people with close to like 700 or just below, and their rates were like 7.5.
Okay.
Then you've got people that were, then you've got people, if they weren't buying it down. And then you've got folks who were, much higher credit scores, and they were in the 60s, in the higher 60s. So it just really depends. And again, I know we've talked about discount and buying it down, and I had another client who really wanted, they were very rate focused, very well qualified, totally, the payment at, 7.3 was fine. But, we were looking at it and they're like, well, we're really interested in maybe even putting less down and using money to buy discount points. And I said, okay, well, tell me about that. Why are you thinking you want to do that? It was, oh, it had the lower payment, the lower rate, And I said, okay, I will show you all the rates, like the rate stack. I showed them from no discount, which was at like 7.375, all the way to like 6.375 maybe, that was almost 2 points, right? And I said, okay, so let's talk about this. And I sent them an email. It had each rate in 8 increments. It had their discount fees that went with them. It had the principal and interest payment, so they could see what they're saving. Then I had a column that said break even. So basically we took that highest rate at 7.3 and said, okay, this is our starting point. So if you want to buy it down here, it's going to cost you this much more, but it's going to save you this much money. We divide those numbers. Okay, that's going to take 39 months for you to recoup the initial output in monthly savings. So after month 39, you're saving that money every month. You're ahead. And so most of them were anywhere from, I think 39 was the lowest, maybe 50 was the highest, going down, almost a point in rate, right? So then I said, well, let's talk about where rates are, what the market's doing, where we anticipate rates to be maybe in a couple of years, a year or two. The big consensus is we will probably see lower rates. You'll be able to refinance, which we had already talked about, probably within 2 years. That's 24 months. So if you buy your rate down and it's going to take you 39 months, that's over 3 years to recoup that. Is it really worth it? What's your priority here? Is it just having a little bit of monthly payment, lower? Is it worth spending $4,000 up front or whatever that is? So when we walk through the math, they're like, oh yeah, no, we want the highest rate. And to me, that is, unless they had a qualification issue and we really had to get the payment down, that's where it's like, okay, well, we're not just looking at maybe the best spend of your money to get you into the house, you might have to buy the rate down. That's different than someone who doesn't have to, but let's just see what the best spend of your dollars are. So just keeping both of those things in mind, just because of the rate environment we're in, we're having a lot more of those conversations. But the shopping one is one I wanted to bring up because I feel like we always see some shopping, but when rates are kind of at their highest, we tend to see more. People just don't like, they don't like to swallow that, like, what, it's really the 7th? Oh, let me see what else got there, and that kind of kicks them off. And a lot of times they're going online, which dear Lord, you may or may not close.
Right, the break-even point is important because other places will tell you to bring 10,000 at closing,
Yes.
right?
Absolutely.
But then the break-even is gonna be 10 years for something ridiculous like that, so.
If you're gonna have a chance to refi well before that.
Sure.
So that does, unless it's a qualification issue, in which case, when we're pre-approving someone, we'll be talking about that. Because right now, investment properties are more likely, you can't get an investment rate without points at this point. You just can't. So, if you're looking at maybe the, 8% is gonna cost you a point or 2 points, depending on where your credit is. If you got good credit, it's probably gonna cost you a point. I've got an investor client, she's at a 685. It's costing her way over 2 points. So what we did, we also run into what's called a high cost mortgage loan. You can only pay so many points. The buyer can only pay their fees, their total fees on the loan can only be a certain percentage of the loan amount. So investment loans will run up against this way sooner than primaries because those rates are more expensive to begin with.
Right.
So we're having those conversations up front and saying, okay, our credit score is here, this is making this more expensive, but the rates only go so high. There's no appetite for rates on the back end at 8.5 or 8.75. So they're pretty much capping at 8.125 on an investment property right now. So you have to pay more to get that as your credit score. That makes sense. There's no way to go up. So we talked through that and I said, okay, so here's what it's gonna cost you, but you need to get the 2% from the seller towards your closing costs. Whatever offer you make, you have to make it with that. You need to get that because they can pay some of that and then now the loan is not high cost. So I had the conversation with the client, had the conversation with her agent, so she knew, hey, okay, I've got to get the 2%. And remember, 2% is the max the seller can contribute on an investment property. So basically, I just made sure they understood you can do it. Now, again, this is a sub 700 credit score on an investment property. That's harder to do. So here's what we have to do. You've got to ask for that. So you may have to offer a little more on the price.
Well, I was gonna say
to
that
get
in the
them
seller's
to-
market,
you
you
know,
have to offset
If
that.
you're offering 300, yeah, you can't lowball it and ask for concession.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you wanna say, hey, it's 300,000, that's what I know the seller wants, okay, I need $6,000, I'm gonna offer 306 and ask them to pay $6,000 for it.
Exactly,
That everybody wins, they get their 300,
right.
you get your $6,000, the loan is doable. There we go. So just, we're looking at all of those things. And again, that's just another thing this kind of rate environment has brought in terms of investment loans. Second homes are similar because their rates are more similar to investment now than they used to be, but the investments tend to have a little bit higher price tag. And remember, the more you put down, the better the rate. So if you've got an investor, really they have to put down, technically mortgage guidelines, 15% is the minimum for an investment property. You can get away with that with Freddie Mac. However, you hardly can price the loan at 15% as an investment right now because the rates, you pretty much have to have 20%. So keep that in your head. If you've got investors, they really need 20%. If they can do 25, they're gonna save money. The rate probably won't change, but their cost will. So that same rate that's gonna cost a high credit borrower a point, at 20% down will probably not cost them anything at 25, or they can get a little bit better rate too. So there is a pretty big pricing break between 20 and 25% down on those investors. Primaries too, but investors, you feel it more because of what they cost right now anyways. So I did want to touch on that because I'm seeing more of the shopping.
And I think as rates go up along with the shopping, I think a lot of lenders are feeling more desperate and are making a little bit more creative estimates. And by creative, I mean not very helpful or honest.
Yeah.
So I think really getting that in writing is even more important than it already is when they're being kind of sketchy about it. And like on the discount point front, I've seen people paying $20,000-$30,000 in discount points and like, they're just never gonna make that back.
Really?
They're just not.
Do you understand that you think, or they just simply wanted a lower rate and they're willing to
I
pay?
think that they just weren't paying attention and they just thought that was part of closing and nobody explained to them.
If they're paying 20 to 30 grand, their house was probably expensive, they probably have lots of money, and they might be just like, they just really didn't look at it, and that could be taken advantage of. I mean, if you go on to Quicken, Rocket Mortgage, you do any kind of, request or quote, you have to go about 2 or 3 clicks in there, every single rate they get has at least a point, if not 2 points of discount associated with it.
Right.
But it is super fine print to read that. So any of your
Sure.
clients who hop online and go to Rocket Mortgage and they want to get a rate quote, they're gonna be like, oh, well, this rate's 6.5, but Aaron said, 6.9.
Yeah.
Like, okay, well, scroll on down and look at the fine print where you're paying, $8,000 to get that versus that.
Yeah.
I can give you that, but that's probably not in your best interest, so,
And there's
Just be
a
aware
lot of that going on, and a lot of subpar lending is and by subpar, I mean the customer service is rough. So now more than ever, it's important to have that really quality lender. If you can get shelter, that's obviously the way you wanna go. But if it's some lender you've never heard of on a listing, that should give you pause, right? And even some of these lenders will call, because that's one thing that y'all do that I think gives you a huge leg up is they call the listing agent and say, hey, my buyer's super qualified.
Right.
And that means a ton, but only if it's coming from someone that you already have a little bit of trust in. If it's some lender you've literally never heard of, it's nice to get that call. It helps if that's your only offer, that makes you feel better about it, and that's wonderful. But if you've got, someone you've never heard of calling, and you've got shelter calling, you can trust what they're saying, right? So just kind of keep that in mind, because I've had several closings recently where the lender is the problem. And it may or may not close. Like I've got one where the underwriter allegedly was going on vacation, but then just like never came back. So, which is neat. But yeah, so they're like, we can't close, because like nobody's touched her loan because they thought she was coming back, but like she's not coming back,
like, it's not that hard.
right? Or like it covers for vacation, I don't know. I don't set their like company policies, but so things like that, like we laugh, but it's not funny for
Right.
this buyer, it's definitely not funny for the seller either, right? So getting those kind of things, like who the lender is matters so much, because, and even with the rates, like if you've got a lender that you've never heard of, or one that you've heard of and know is not amazing, promising they can do, 6.6 and Aaron's at 6.9. Well, the cost difference between that is not worth not closing. It's not worth losing your earnest money. So that's the other thing, like to build on, okay, let me look at the estimate, but on top of that, even if it's not quite the same, can we trust that this is gonna close? Because that's a lot more important than the money you could save. And I think, we all know better in this room, but a lot of buyers think if my lender gave me a pre-approval, I'm golden. There's no way this won't close, which we all know is not the case. And not that we should go around like, terrifying all of the buyers and saying the chances of you closing is like 50-50, can't wait to do it. But like, just know that some lenders will get you to the closing table and some may or may not. So that's.
Two things regarding that is that, Matt, he's not here, but Matt actually called this listing agent for me on a Sunday.
Mhm.
When typically nobody's doing anything,
Well, and that's,
and vouch for my client.
thanks for bringing that up, because we do that all the time. We had one last week that I did with, Ryan, and he was doing the open house, he was sitting in the open house for another agent. A couple came through, were very interested in the house and wanted to make an offer. They literally had gone on Redfin and seen this open house, and like, I don't know exactly how Redfin works, but then I made the comment, like, they want to see the house. So a Redfin agent met them there, never got out of his car. So the couple goes in the house, starts talking to Ryan, they're like, really, and so he ended up meeting with them for coffee after the open house. And he wrote the offer for them.
Wow.
And so he called me on Saturday, he texted me, and because we are working on the weekend, if y'all need us,
Right.
like it's not like we're sitting at our computers waiting for
Sure.
me, but we are available.
Right.
We are home, I can fire up my laptop and look at it, we know real estate is not Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. We knew that when we got into business.
Actually,
And if you're gonna be good at what you do, you are available when you're needed. And we have a team, and that's the joy of it. Matt's in London, okay, well, Hunter was at the Alabama game on Saturday. If I was around, I could have been like, yeah, text me, whatever, I can call somebody, like, we got each other's backs too,
right,
So, I talked to the clients, they sounded great, really well qualified, I sent them the link to the application, this was on Saturday, they did the application. I hopped on, I was at my parents' house for dinner, I'm like, hey, I need to look at this, looked at it, sent a letter. They made an offer, they were under contract on Sunday. I called the listing agent who, lo and behold, knows Hunter and has done some deals with Hunter, so
There you
like,
go.
he really liked our offer, there were many of them, but he's like, I know Onward, you know, I know your team, so,
Yeah.
you know, we won it. And there were multiple offers on it. Yeah, Shelter
I'm on
Hunter.
Vegas.
I was gonna say, yeah,
Shelter is still there, and there's still.
and another comment in your favor, is that I had a closing with, I'm the listing agent.
Yeah.
And Rocket Mortgage was on the other side. I have never sweated so much, like so many things you sweat,
Yeah.
and then thinking Rocket Mortgage is gonna close, you know, because we needed that closing to fund for the next closing and all that kind
Yeah.
of stuff. You closed, unbelievable, thank God, but yeah, it makes you
You just
generate the
don't know.
whole weekend and all that.
Yeah.
Well,
With
they
that.
don't have the same sort of customer service. Is really what it comes down to, like the big banks and like the really like national, like rocket lenders. They're not, excuse me, gonna have the person who will answer the phone on a Sunday or pick up after 5 o'clock.
Somehow they had a broker here in town.
Oh, they have, they use a mortgage
Yeah, so that
broker.
made me feel a lot better, because I could talk to
There's
her and
so
all
much-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was cool, but otherwise I was still like,
Yeah.
Question, so did an open house for somebody, had a buyer come through and probably, you know, we could have done a contingent offer probably, but she wasn't quite ready at the timing of the seller would work. But, so is there still like a bridge loan, and what kind of financing?
So that's a great question. Now, if you've got buyers who own their house and they have a lot of equity, there are a couple options. So they can do, we do have a contact that will do basically a bridge HELOC. I think it's like 6 months long,
Okay,
as long as their house is not listed yet. So that's one important factor. So if they haven't listed their home, but they're like, hey, I got, you know, 200,000 in equity. You know, you can't pull all of it out. I think usually it's like up to 90% total LTV, loan to value. So if they're, say their house is worth 500 and they are, they have a loan for 300, they could pull out at least 100, but they can't pull all the way out to, you know. But they, so they could do the bridge loan, get that out. That'll probably take about 3 weeks. So the earlier we start that, and now it can be going simultaneous, even if we put them under contract. So just know that, but we can do that option. The home's not listed. Obviously, whatever that payment is will be calculated in our debt to income ratio.
okay.
And they have to be able to carry the house with it. So that's the thing.
Right.
So as long as if it's just a, hey, I just want to move first and not deal with trying to time it, and I want some equity out of it, but I can cover both mortgage payments, that's the client that will work well for.
Okay,
So yes, we do have that option. The other option, sometimes they need to have that payment gone too. So it's like they want the equity out, but they also, DTI reasons, they can't carry both mortgage payments and qualification. So we need to either get the home sold first, or we do have another option, that called Up Equity. It's similar to like Homeward and some of those other companies.
right,
But they don't actually purchase the house, they don't have their own lender, they don't really have their own agent. So they're really working, if you're the one who's gonna sell their house, you're still gonna sell their house.
okay,
So what Up Equity does is they come in, they'll kind of value the house, and you can kind of help them if you know, hey, we're gonna list it at 500,
Okay.
you know, they're gonna kind of take that. Now, they're not gonna give, and they can do 2 ways. If the client has money for the down payment and they don't have to have their equity right away, then they can just do the part where they put the contract on it. Up Equity will put a contract for 6 months, no contingencies, giving them the time to sell it over that 6 months period. And basically their contract says, hey, we'll buy it in 6 months if we have to. They don't want to, but they're basically just giving them that safety net, and it's a non-contingent contract, so we as a lender can now not count their payment. So we can say, okay, their house is gonna be sold,
Okay.
but there is a contract on it, non-contingent, that will buy it, so I know. So what they do is they'll take, 6 months worth of mortgage payments for that property, basically out of the client's equity, so they'll put that in a little escrow account. And so they'll make the payments on that property until it's sold. So if you're the agent, you're gonna come in and sell it, list it, do everything you do like normal, all your commission is yours, there's nothing there. It doesn't cost the client money, of course, so I think it's like 1.9% for them to use Up Equity, which gets paid at the end. If they also need equity out of the home, if they're like, hey, I need to get the home off my DTI and I want money from it, they can do an advance on some of their equity. They're not gonna give them all of the equity. maybe around half.
So like fix up the home or whatever way.
Yeah, if they wanna do that, or to put down on the next home so they can get the heck out, yep, exactly, so that's another option, now that's another couple of percent, that's a different fee, so that's, you don't have to take equity up front, but you can. So it's a pretty cool program, I think Matt just closed one with it right before, he left for London. But it's a really good option. But what I like so much about it is that it keeps you as the agent totally as the selling agent, and you know, you can list it, they're not coming in and like
Yeah.
buying a house and then
Right,
them
right,
turning
right.
around and selling it.
Okay.
So that's another cool option. We literally
Nice.
learned all about it. The guy was on our sales meeting this past week, like 2 days ago, so.
I know that Hunter recently had a class for training on renovation loans, I think.
Yep,
It'd be cool to have one or just all these loans,
Yeah,
like 10 minutes of
yeah.
each,
yep,
something like
yep,
that.
yep,
And you know, it's tax ID loan, because you've got that now, right?
yes, we do.
Yeah, because that's huge.
Yep.
How about that in meeting? That. a lot of
Yeah.
People would utilize that.
The tax ID loan obviously means that if they don't have a social, that's fine. It is a little more money down, I can't remember if it's 10%, I
Right.
think it's 10.
Surely 15,
Yeah, I don't know, I'll have to double check.
yeah, and the interest rate's pretty high too.
Yeah, so I mean, it's certainly not, you know, gonna be the same terms as
Sure,
conforming or not gonna have 3% down.
To buy a house.
Yeah, but you know, it's really for people who've got that tax ID in a business and, you know, don't have the social and all that good stuff and wanna do it that way. But yeah, we definitely have lots of options. So if you have a situation and you're like, I wonder if there's a way to work this. Or, you know, I've got a client who needs to sell or wants to sell, but, you know, doesn't wanna try, you know, that timing and all that good stuff. You know, come talk to us, let's talk through the options, because we do have options. And they may differ depending on the client's situation and their qualification and all that good stuff. We've got ways to work about any situation as far as that goes.
nice.
But, yeah. Any other questions on that, or anything else that's come up, or?
So another thing, and if y'all think of a question, you can cut me off, but another thing I've seen recently in closing is name differences. And so what we try to do is we ask for we ask for a copy of the ID ahead of time. The success rate of us getting it is pretty low, but as an agent, which it like, we don't have to have it. We just want it so the closing is smoother and easier for you guys. They have to bring it to close, like we do have to verify the identity, but we ask for it ahead of time so we can make sure that everyone's names are spelled correctly. Cause like I had one a couple weeks ago where a lady showed up to sell her house, you know, she hadn't sent her ID in even though that we had asked for it. And it turned out she'd actually gotten married since she bought the house, which means the name on her ID was in fact not the name that we had on all the documents.
Right.
So can we fix that? Sure, she luckily had her marriage certificate with her, but part of what we have to do is run a lien search on that name. And so it's not a matter of me just putting together a name affidavit and fixing it on our documents and boom, re-signing. We have to get that lien search order. So she did sit there for a little bit of time while they conducted that lien search.
That makes sense.
It worked out, we still closed, so it's not necessarily like an end of the world thing, but it could have been incredibly problematic if there was a lien against that name, and then we weren't able to get that payoff real quickly. So that kind of thing does happen.
Or
So
it
make
could
sure-
take you longer, right? If say she's got a common name, now you have to confirm if it's her or not. Like attorneys have asked that during title search, like, hey, if the first and last name are fairly common, then it's like, we need part of the social, they need to go through and make sure it's not, you know,
Right.
our Joe Smith, it's a different,
Right.
you know?
Right,
So for her, she could
So-
have sat there even longer if she had a more common.
If I-
2%.
Running the contract and the name on the ID is different from the name on the social security card, which one should I use?
I would go with the
ID.
name on the ID,
On the ID.
but also pull the deed, what's on the deed, right? And I'm happy to pull the deed, if you ever need that, just send me an email, the property address and the county it's in for Georgia properties, and I can pull that. So like if the social security card says Ashley Connor, the ID says Ashley Nance,
Yeah.
the deed says Ashley Nance, I would probably say, hey, why is your name different? I would say, well, I got married. You said, okay, the, attorney is gonna need to see your marriage certificate. You can go ahead and give that to me. We'll set up all your paperwork and I'll make sure the attorney gets it.
Yeah.
So then you set up the paperwork is Ashley Connor, FKA, or formerly known as Ashley Nance. And that tells everybody that either there was a marriage, a divorce, or some sort of name, like legal name
Yeah.
change for whatever reason. So having that, but I would look at the deed too and ask the question, like, why did your name change? If it's a divorce situation rather than a marriage, we're gonna need the divorce paperwork anyway. So
Right.
when you go ahead and ask your client for that, then you have it, you send it over to the attorney, we're super thankful. Or we say, hey, we need this divorce paperwork, can you send it? And you're like, yep, I already got it, here you go. And then your client thinks you're awesome because you've preempted this, you've asked for it before they've packed it up. Because by the time we get title back, it's typically depending on how long your closing is, within a week or two of closing, they might have already packed up those documents, because nobody's like, ooh, I need
Right.
access to my divorce paperwork all the time, right? They packed that first. So if you've asked for it, you've saved them a lot of headache, because then they're gonna be mad that we wanna see it, and they're gonna be mad that we're asking for it so late,
Yeah.
but we didn't know to ask for it until we do to ask for it, right? And it's a good way for y'all to ask those questions and it not be super awkward,
Sure.
right? You don't wanna ask everyone, did you happen to ever get married or divorced in your life? They're like, what are you talking about? Why do you care? But if you're looking at IDs and you ask what the name changes, that's a very logical way to get that same information before it becomes a problem.
And if it's a buyer, use their ID, like whatever's on their
Right.
ID is what you want in contract, because that's all we really care about.
And
And
some
that's it.
lenders are not good at getting IDs, which is shocking
Someone?
to me.
That
Some
is
lenders don't ask for IDs.
Okay.
And I ask the same question, I don't know how that happens, but it does. And so what they'll do is you'll have someone come in like, okay, my name's Ashley Connor, I wanna get the loan, it's Ashley Connor, that's great, we move on. Nobody has ID, we've asked a couple of times, but we're not gonna hold up closing because you didn't email us the ID, it'll just be a problem that we have to deal with at closing. Not ideal for anybody, but it's doable, right? So you show up to closing, your ID says Ashley Nance, and I'm like, hey lender, this is the wrong name, you're like, Ashley Nance legally doesn't exist, or Ashley Connor doesn't exist. It's nice that she wants to be Connor, I know she got married, she's super excited, but her name is still Ashley Nance. And if you go to foreclose on Ashley Connor, that is not this human being, right? So then it's a problem, and what happens with those lenders is they say, but we've done everything on Ashley Connor, we've pulled Ashley Connor's credit report, we're gonna have to go back through underwriting for it to be Ashley Nance. And so we represent the lender. So all we're supposed to do is tell the lender, hey, advise the lender, you're gonna have an issue foreclosing X, Y, Z. I can't force the lender to do anything. So if that lender says, you know what, just put an AKA on the security deed, that's what we'll do. And some lenders will say that. That's not the greatest way to do it from the lender perspective. I think it's better for the lender certainly to have to redo everything, which is going to delay your closing. If we get that ID ahead of time, we have the title order from the lender that says we're making a loan to Ashley Connor. I see it's Ashley Nance, and I'm like, hey lender, did you know that your buyer's name is really Ashley Nance? Oh, she's getting married, it's fine. It's not fine. You want it to be Nance. At that point, they don't want to rerun credit, but they'll do it to make the loan right, and it's not pushing back or holding up closing. So just get those IDs ahead of time. And I think for y'all's safety, it's a great idea to have IDs anyway, have them on file with your office. And so if you're out and about showing a buyer property, you can say hey office, just want you to know, I'm going out and about with Tim Smith today. And then if you don't come back, they at least have, I know they were with Tim Smith, let's
It's
find
like the
Tim.
car dealership taking your ID, they look like you are.
Okay.
But,
We're just gonna drive the car and try why.
well, but they take it out of there, because if you don't bring the guy back with your test drive, they want to know who's that.
Yeah, so the safety thing is good, but also for ease of closing, having the loan in the correct name to avoid delays from the seller.
That's insane to me to think that lenders wouldn't have, ID is when, we can't even send the file to underwriting until we get a copy of the ID. So
I wonder what
that
happens.
is, we're asking at pre-approval stage, because we also wanna make sure credit is 90% hold on me. So if we pull a credit report and, say they go by a different last name or whatever,
Right.
we have to go back when we get the ID, if it's different from what they say, then we have to go back and re-pull that credit to match the ID, because that is the name that the human being That's their name, so that's what we have, you know, and there might be different stuff on the credit that did populate on the first time with the name a little bit different, even though the social's the same. You know, we often think it's the social that everything's tied to, but it's not all tied to the social. So, keep that in mind, when we're pre-approving someone, we're having that conversation, we're sending them the application, like it's all there in bright bold. Please use your legal name as it is on your driver's license, you know,
I can
we're asking
imagine
for the driver's license.
what a close it might be with Canyon West. Change the name to whatever it changes, T is it? Or Prince.
For everyone, for the lender, for the attorney, for the agent, for the client, for them to just be, you know, I cannot tell you, until I did this for a living, I did not realize so many people in the world like to go by their middle name. And that's cool, but you, hey, they like their middle name better. But yeah, you see?
Yeah.
Yeah, until you see their ID and then you're like, oh, saying, okay, cool, but we want the loan to show correctly. So, and we do it from the front end, it's so much easier for everybody.
And it's just a government issued photo ID
Yeah.
is what we need. So like a passport is fine, green card is fine, those kind of things. Driver's license, of course, the most common, but the word current is important as
Yeah.
well. Because I can't tell current,
Current
the
photo.
amount of times people show up with an expired driver's license. That doesn't do us any good. We
Right.
can't use that. We can't use your expired passport, your expired green card. It's got to be current. And that's the
So
other
if you use as an attorney, the expired license with the copy of the paper that shows it's renewed, but
Yeah.
you don't have.
Yeah, the renewal
And that's
paperwork is fine. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, because that's still a government issued
Right.
photo identification. It just feels weird because it's on a piece of paper, but if it's a renewal, then that is totally fine. But that's the other reason we like to get it ahead of time as well, because a lot of people don't actually look at like the expiration date of their license. So they're used to showing it and then you look at it and
You
you're
need to go back and find out.
because you don't really need to, but if it's expired, it doesn't do us any good, right? So if you send the
I
ID.
did what you know.
So it's not that all these people are rolling up with purposely expired IDs, they just didn't realize it expired last month. But if I get your ID and we're closing on September 30th, and I see your license is expiring September 10th, I'm gonna say, or expired yesterday, I'm gonna say, hey, did you know your license expired yesterday? You do need a current government issued photo ID, so you need to get that renewed, or make sure you bring your current passport, something of the like. Cause it's really stressful for the client to get there and me say, this is not gonna work, look, we can sign everything, but we're gonna have to close an escrow until you have some sort of current ID. Now, every now and then, if it was like yesterday, underwriter, title insurance underwriter is probably gonna be okay with that, lender is likely gonna be okay with that, because it's yesterday. If it's 6 months ago, forget it, right? So just kind of pay attention to that, because it does happen, unfortunately.
Trigger another question. I know you told us how to do this. So houses and trust, just, you know, for financial reasons. So they would sign as trustee, whatever of the trust, right? For a listing sake. And then what other documents do I need from them?
So you wanna ask for their trust agreement.
Okay.
Legally, trust agreements are private. So if they tell you, I don't have to give you the trust agreement, I wouldn't fight them on it and say, okay, I do need the certificate of trust that you can give me. You can totally work with that. From a title insurance company perspective, you know, they insure the transaction. They're not just going off of what's legal, like what is legal sets the lowest bar. They might have heightened standards or heightened requirements. So they might say, sure, legally, that's private. But for us to agree to insure this transaction, we need to see the whole agreement.
Okay.
I don't think that's a battle that's worth you guys fighting. So I would just certificate of trust, and what that is it's like a 1 to 3 page summary of the trust. So it'll say the name of the trust, who the creators, sometimes it'll be called a settlor, trustor, grantor, it just means the creator who's funding the trust. It'll name that person, it'll name the trustee who's got the authority to sign and act on behalf of the trust. And then it lists out like the most relevant powers. So really what we're looking for and what most people are looking for, like a bank is gonna wanna see that they have some financial powers. We're of course gonna wanna see that they have real estate powers, they can sell this property, buy this property. So it's like a very short summary, they should be able to give that to you. If they refuse to give you that, might be a red flag. And just say, I need to see who has authority to sign. And they say, well, it's me. Say, okay, great, then give me the certificate of trust so I can see that in writing.
Right.
What happens sometimes is like, I might be the trustee, but maybe I'm 92 years old in assisted living, so my child is the successor trustee. There should be a document that shows that. Yeah, if that's not in the certificate of trust and you're dealing with the child, say, hey, can I see the page of the trust agreement that shows you're the successor trustee? They should be able to pull that, if, or push you back on the trust agreement.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. I know I have a closing at 11, so I'm gonna pop over, but thank you so much.
Thank you, guys. As always.
All right, y'all, have an amazing night.
Can't see what